and welcome to The Art of Being Human. We have basically finished our studies on suicide, but I want to get into drug addiction now because there's a great increase of suicide among people who are drug users. And so it kind of naturally follows that we should be studying about drugs. And I want to go into all kinds of drugs, not just the illicit ones, but over-the-counter ones too. And I don't believe that anyone who is taking drugs has done it for the purpose of becoming suicidal. You know, there are some people who say that alcoholism and drug abuse are the slow suicide. In other words, you're basically going to die. But I don't think anyone starts out thinking that that's going to happen, although it does happen to many people. So let me go through what happens for people who start drugs. Why do people start using drugs to begin with? Well, I believe that a lot of people start because they are in intense emotional pain or intense physical pain or both, and they really need relief, and they're not getting the relief that they need, and so they start on drugs to give them the relief that they need. Now, I want to mention that if you have been abused or if you've had bad things happen to you that have caused you a lot of emotional pain, every time you think back to that, even though years may have passed, every time you think back to it, you re-experience it. Just like it happened before for the first time. It's like you can't get rid of it. Now, I know a lot of people heal from bad things happening to them, and they don't experience it so intensely, and it doesn't interfere so much with their lives. But there's a group of people, quite a group of people, that have just the same reactions as they had when the incident first happened. You were either hit by a car, or you went through a nasty divorce, or somebody molested you. It could be anything. Now, there's a part of the brain, and I'm going to just for a moment turn to this chart on the brain here that I have, and the little spot here that I have is the amygdala. It is deep within the brain, and it is responsible for us remembering events and how events happen and things like that. And so therefore, when you think about something in the past that's happened to you that's been very painful, all of those neurons charge up and they start functioning again, just like they did before. And so it's like it remembers for you the things that happened to you, supposing that you just had a very difficult childhood, your father was an alcoholic, your mother was on drugs, there was a divorce, and every time you think you're doing fine, but every time you think about it, it just occurs that all of the pain comes back. It's because of the amygdala. So there is a brain reason for you to remember, a brain reason, physiological reason for you to have experiences that are more painful than you need to have with the years maybe that have gone by. Now, some people are more sensitive to this than others, but nonetheless, it is a reality. So I think people get into drugs to ease their emotional pain, to ease their physical pain. That's one reason. Another reason is they start because they're curious. You know, preteens especially, children especially. What's it like to take drugs? Well, they tell us not to do it. Well, what's going to happen? Well, it can't be that bad. And then if you look at their family history, maybe their parents are on drugs. So you have to consider what they're coming from, what their home environments are like. But even so, they think that they can beat it out. Oh, I'm going to try it. I'll try it a little bit. It'll be okay. I'm just going to sample it. And before you know it, they're addicted, because addiction can happen very fast. There are some people who can become addicted to a drug on the first dose. Now, not everybody. Some people you work up to it with time, or you can get into it accidentally, but nonetheless, some people are curious, especially children and preteens, and what happens, they go ahead and they start the drugs just to see what it's like. And some people start drugs because not only do they want to see what it's like, but they truly believe that they can beat it out. No drug is going to control me. I'll take what I want, and that'll be it. And when I want to stop, I'll stop. I've got a good brain. I can tell myself not to take drugs. I don't have to continue with it. And so what they do is they get into this mindset of no matter what happens, I can always stop it. You know, it reminds me of a college student that I worked with, and she was going to cut through the woods to go home once, and I says, you know, there are a lot of attacks out there. She says, that's all right, I can run fast. And she felt she could overdo anything anyone tried to do by running fast. And so it is, I can stop the drugs. All I have to do is say no. When I've had enough, I've had enough. And of course, before you know it, as I mentioned before, it's like the spider and the fly. The fly gets into the spider's web, and no matter how hard they try, they can't get out. And they struggle to get out, and they flail, and the little legs are going, and the wings are going, but they're stuck. They can't get out. There are some people who feel they can beat it no matter what. And some people, they get into it because it's accidental. They start off on some kind of a drug program because of the medical condition they have, and it just goes too far. And one thing leads to another, and before they know it, they're also hooked. How would you know when you're hooked? How do you know when you're addicted? Well, there is a difference between dependency on a drug and addiction to the drug. If you are dependent on the drug, you really want it. You really want it, but you can say no. Your behavior is going to be normal. You can go through every day like the normal person that you normally are. When you are addicted, you've crossed the line, and you not only need it, but you want it, and you have to have it. I think the point at which you have to have it, that no getting around it, you've got to have it. There's no choice. It has to be in your system. That's the point of the addiction, when you go from wanting it to needing it. That's the addiction. Now, you can be emotionally dependent on a drug and not physically addicted to it. You could be emotionally dependent on it. You have to have it. You want to have it. It's like an intense desire to have it. You have a craving for it. But that's still not quite the addictive part. When you pass over, and if I'm going to die if I don't have it, all your life now revolves around getting that next fix. That's when you are addicted to it. If it interferes with your normal activities, and this is one definition of addiction, if it interferes with your normal life, so your normal life comes second and getting the dose of the drug comes first, then you are addicted to the drug. But it can happen gradually over a period of time. And as it happens gradually over a period of time, you could get drawn into it without hardly realizing that you're getting drawn into it. But by that time, like the spider and the fly, it's too late. Now, I want to go on with this in terms of drug addiction and what it does to you. There's a pattern that develops in people who use drugs, and this will be a very familiar story for many of you. You start, you start taking the drug or alcohol, whatever it is. Alcohol is a drug too, and you feel good. It feels very good. And then you don't take it, and you're fine. And you say, well, there's nothing wrong with my taking this. I feel just the same as I did before. There are no changes. So you get the feeling that this drug is safe. If you take a small dose to relax for a while, and then after that you return to your normal self again, what's wrong with that? It's like a temporary escape. And then you keep doing it. And then you notice after a while you need more of it to get that same good feeling. And so therefore you take a little more of it. You don't think anything about it because you're not taking a whole lot of it. You're taking a little more than you were, then a little more than you were, then a little more than you were. And then you find that this isn't enough. And you're not getting the feelings that you did before. And the other thing that's developing is you're starting to get withdrawal symptoms if you don't get the drug. Now, withdrawal symptoms will vary depending upon what kind of a drug you're on. But it's bad. It's always bad. And then when you need more to keep going, and then you have to have it, because if you don't take it, you'll experience the withdrawal symptoms. Why do people continue on drugs? Because they have to fend off the withdrawal symptoms, which can be very, very terrible. As one woman put it, she said, at first you think you're going to die, and then you're afraid you won't. You'd rather die. And that's how she described what the withdrawal symptoms are. If you don't take it during withdrawal, then for the most part, you're going to get over that hump. But the craving may still be there. You may still crave it. And it'll be very easy for you to get back on it again. Most people who go into rehab 7 or 8 times before it finally takes hold, before finally they can lick it, because the intense desire for the drug is so much. Now, that partly depends upon the drug. And so it's a gradual transition. I think when we are dealing with people who are drug addicted, we have to have compassion for them, because a lot of times they got into it not intending to get into it that deeply, but they did get into it that deeply. Now, I'll tell you about an experience that I had, and I certainly didn't become addicted, but I was given a pain medication, and this is several years ago, and I think it was called Darvon Comp. I think that was the name of the prescription, but it was quite a few years ago, so I can't be 100% sure. And I took it, just a pill, and in 10 minutes or so, I felt terrific. It was like a euphoria. Nothing could harm me now. I was just on top of the world. It was a drug high, some kind of a drug high, and I felt terrific. And I thought, well, this is an unusual reaction just to take a pill, a pain pill. So I suspected that this was a chemical reaction that was going on in my body, and of course it was. I took it twice more just to see if I would get the same reaction, and I did both times. Everything was terrific. Now, that feeling of euphoria didn't last too long. It lasted for about 15 minutes or so, and then it was gone, and I was back to my normal self. And then I realized, of course, what could happen, because I've been trained in the use of drugs and what happens in addiction, and I just threw the drugs away. I wouldn't have it anymore. I wouldn't take it anymore, because I wouldn't take that risk of possibly wanting it a little more and taking it a little more, getting another prescription if I could, and continuing on that path. It's a dangerous path, yet it seems innocent enough when you start down that path. That's why I think a lot of people who become drug addicted, they kind of get drawn into it accidentally without realizing that they're getting hooked. But I had enough knowledge to know that was a possibility that could happen, and I only took 3 doses of the drug, one when I first experienced it, and twice afterwards to see if I got the same reaction. And when I got the same reaction both times, that I realized that it was a drug that was doing it, and so I just wouldn't take any more. I shortchanged the addiction. I just wouldn't take it. And so I was never addicted to it. I just got rid of it, and I would never take any more after that. But people get into it, don't have such an intense reaction right off the bat. You know, they feel good for a while, they go back to normal. They feel good for a while, they go back to normal. They may not feel euphoric like I did, but they get to the point where they need to feel good, and they need to feel good more and more, and it takes more and more, so they take more and more, thinking, this is all right, it's not harming me. What they don't realize is all that time that they're becoming dependent on that drug that they think isn't harming them, what's happening is that their brain is changing. The brain chemistry is changing, and when it changes to the point where it is adapted to the drug, it wants the drug, it expects the drug, and then one step over, it demands the drug, and you can't get away from it because the symptoms are so strong, you just have to have that next fix, and your life revolves about getting that next fix. That can happen to anybody. This is why I think we need to approach this with compassion. Nobody starts out taking a drug thinking, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to be addicted. I'm just taking a little bit and it'll help me and I'll be okay. But you see, what happens is that okay, it doesn't last very long. And then the brain, whenever you put any drug in your system, your brain's reacting to it. And it can get very bad. It depends upon the drug. Some drugs will give you dependence, but don't give you addiction so much. But you can get addicted to almost anything. And you have to be really careful. I saw a little 4-year-old girl talk to her mother, who was an alcoholic. And she was with adults, too, so she wasn't alone. And I happened happened to be there visiting at the time, and she's talking to her mother in a 4-year-old fashion. Mommy, I take care of you. You be okay. You be okay. I take care of you. Now, what a responsibility that little girl must have felt to care for her mother, who was an adult. And I felt so sad for them, because this is not the way life should be, not for a 4-year-old, not for the adult either. But so much can happen to us. People can have so much pain. So many things can happen to them that they really need relief. And there has to be a way for them to get that relief. But drug addiction is not the answer, because when you take too much of a drug, then you're not helping yourself. You're getting addicted to the drug, which adds a further problem to the ones that you already have. Anytime you put a drug in your system, it's going to change you in some kind of way. It's a chemical. Of course, your body's going to react to it. If it didn't react to it, it wouldn't work. And I'm not saying don't take prescriptions. If you need to take prescriptions, take them. I take 9 pills every day when I get up, and I don't forget. But they monitor heart rate, blood pressure, diabetes, because I'm a severe diabetic. So it's all necessary. But they aren't drugs that I would become addicted to. And if I thought I was becoming addicted, then I would go to the doctor and say, give me something else. And doctors are trained too. They know what drugs are safe to take. That's why some drugs you have to have only so many prescriptions, and you can't have any more than that within a certain range of time. It's to protect against addiction. And drugs are classified. They're in different classes depending upon how addictive that they can be. So medical staff are watching this kind of thing, and so they can give good advice in terms of what you take and what you can't take. Plus, all the time, you can develop a serious reaction to a drug. You can become allergic to a drug. There's all of those kinds of things to consider, and you have to remember that very young children react differently to drugs than adults do, and sometimes the elderly react differently to drugs than what regular adults do. So there's lots of things to keep in mind. So the physical symptoms of an addict, though, are very, very serious. And there's all the pain and the nausea and the vomiting and the cramping and the diarrhea and everything else that they're going through, the mental stress that they're going through, the sweats, the chills, all of that. It's very severe. In some cases, it's very severe. And medication has to be given to ease those symptoms, or the person just has to go back on the drug, or they feel they have to go back on the drug. It's very hard to get off drugs cold turkey. Some people have done it. I've known people who have done it, but it's very, very difficult to do. And it's much better to do it under supervision, where someone can watch you and help you and take care of you during the process, and you don't feel totally alone, and you know you're going to get the help you need. And then after a period of time, it will kind of phase off and you'll feel better. Now, what happens in the physiology of the brain is that it actually changes it. If a person were to take LSD, which is a hallucinatory drug, then it can change them to the point where they can't perceive normally, and they have hallucinations, and they have delusions. It's a hallucinogenic drug, and they are sometimes hospitalized for the rest of their lives. Why? Because they can't think normally. They think like they can jump out of a tree because now they can fly. In their hallucinations, they can fly, so they jump out of a tree or they jump out of a building, and it isn't really a suicide attempt. They're just trying to fly. There's one man who is actually in a hospital for the rest of his life, and he doesn't want anyone to touch him because he thinks he's become squishy like a tomato. This is an actual case I'm talking about. And they feel if anyone touches him, they're going to drive their hands right through his body because he's squishy like a tomato. There's no way he can take care of himself. There's no way he can lead a normal life because of that. And so the hallucinogenic experiences they have, because the brain is tricked into doing that. The brain thinks that they're getting some kind of natural chemical responses, and they're not. They're getting it from the drug, but they're reacting as if it's coming from their own brain. It gets to be interesting, but it gets to be devastating. So there is no such thing as a completely safe drug. And yet, if you need a drug, which is a prescription, of course, then you need to take it. Because if you take it, then you will help yourself to feel better. It may help to prevent you from getting worse. It may heal a disease. It may control symptoms of a disease, and there's no reason not to take it unless you are allergic to it or you're trying to take it without medical supervision. One of the reasons that prescriptions have to be renewed and you get a new prescription every year is because it's to protect you against any kind of effects of the drug. A doctor needs to know how you're reacting to a drug before they can administer it again. And so therefore, it just natural consequences, you have to be checked for that. So even people who take normal drugs, that is over-the-counter drugs, can run into trouble. And for example, there are people who are, if they take certain drugs, they respond to the drugs in a kind of an unhealthy kind of way. They go into seizures. There are some drugs that will give you kind of an aura, and then you have a seizure after that. That's just a drug, a psychiatric medication that does that. There was one radio host who is well known. He's listened to by millions of people. He took a drug for something. I don't know whether it was a prescription or a non-prescription, but what happened to him was he became deaf within a half an hour after he took it. He started his radio show, and within a half an hour he had no hearing. He was completely deaf. And he had to stop doing his show for a number of months, and then they gave him a cochlear implant, which put an artificial implant in his ears, and he was able to hear again and resume his program. But you have to understand there's no really totally safe drug. It does not exist. So we don't have much time left. I'm going to close it here, and we're going to continue with this next time. Please join me then.